Hey, this is Friday's lesson. A few girls are away today, so we're recording the lesson. Last lesson, we looked at our introduction to Pythagoras' theorem. This is the sheet that we did. And it says that Pythagoras' theorem can only be applied to right-angled triangles. So Pythagoras' theorem will only work for right-angled triangles. And then you learnt about a particular side which was opposite the right angle. Do you know what it's called? Anyone? We then looked at this, and it said to use Pythagoras' theorem, you must be able to identify which side is the hypotenuse, and the hypotenuse is opposite the right angle, but it's also the longest side of the triangle. So, Pythagoras' theorem, only for right-angled triangles, and you have to know which side is the hypotenuse, okay? That's what we looked at last lesson. And so hopefully you filled out all of the sheet, okay? This is Nicole's sheet. So last lesson we also looked here and you had to name the hypotenuse. Remember, the hypotenuse is opposite the right angle. So for example, the hypotenuse in this one was called the side AB, and that little c is its length, okay? So remembering that the hypotenuse is opposite the right angle in this triangle, there's the hypotenuse there. It's called side PQ. And its length is little r. So you completed that last lesson as well. Okay, girls, we're now going to watch this quick demonstration on Pythagoras' theorem.
This is going to be sound.
No, there's no sound with it. Oh, apart from the water. But I'll play this a couple of times. But on the two shorter sides, we've got two squares. And the water that fills up those squares is like the area of those squares. And the area of those two squares equals the area of the big square on the other side. So,
the big square equals 90.
Well, no, see this side, that's the hypotenuse. Okay, can you see what I'm doing? I'm pointing to the shorter side there and the other shorter side there. So what they're doing, they're drawing squares on the...
First replay arrow.
We've got the two shorter sides. There are squares drawn on the two shorter sides, and the sum of the squares on the two shorter sides equal the square on the longer side. Now, it's really important that you know that it's the squares on each of those sides. When we talk about squares in maths, if that side length, for example, is 3, then the square is 3 squared, or 3 times 3.
And if the other side
is 4, then it's 4 squared, 4 times 4. This one might be 5, which is 5 times 4. All right, we're going to look at another video on Pythagoras' theorem as well. Okay, so we've got a right-angled triangle, and I'm going to pause it for a sec, and I wish that would stop. Now, okay, I've got, if you count the little squares, which one's the biggest side or the longest side?
that one.
This one up here. Yep, the hypotenuse. So girls, this is the square on the hypotenuse. How many squares in this hypotenuse? 5? Another 5?
5 times 6.
Well, we've got 5 times 5. What's that? I've got 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 squares on the hypotenuse, right? How many squares on this shorter side?
9.
So I've got, because it's 3 times 3 is 9. And on this other side, I've got 4 rows of 4, 16. Which is 16. Now, if I count the squares here, which is 9, and I count these squares here, which are 16, 16 plus 9 equals 25. So the sum of the squares on the two shorter sides, the sum of the squares on the two shorter sides equals the number of squares on the longest side. Okay, I'm going to play the video now. So, girls, it says this square plus this square equals this square. So, what they're doing, those 9 squares plus those 16 squares here equals 25 squares. Can we see that? The two smaller squares, 9 plus 16 equals 25. So we write the theorem as a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Now we're going to write these in our notes in a minute, so don't do it yet. Now this a squared plus b squared equals c squared is called Pythagoras' theorem. Okay, so what they did, these were the two smaller squares. They put those 9 and 16 squares together and they found that which was 25 and it equals to those other squares that we had. I think they're going to put those squares back on the triangles now. Okay, the squares are dancing. Okay, so girls, here we go. Now let's have a look. We've got A, B, C. Ladies, if you want visual learning, we've got A, B, C watching. But it's not that A equals, it's A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Now we're filling up the squares on each side. We fit 9 squares in there. We fit 16 in the B squared. And we fit 25 in the C squared. It's because 9 plus 16 equals 25. So girls, you don't go 3 plus 4 is 5, because it's not. It's the squares that have to be added together. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. One sec. So that's Pythagoras' theorem. Now we're going to write some notes on this. After looking at that, we're going to write out the rule for Pythagoras' theorem. Remember that Pythagoras' theorem only works for right-angled triangles. Now, when you do Pythagoras' theorem, girls, we call the two shorter sides A and B, and the longer side is what? C? Okay? So what is Pythagoras' theorem? It's not that A plus B equals C. What is it? What did we just see in those videos? What was drawn on the sides? Squares. Squares. So it's A squared plus B squared. A square was drawn there and a square equals C squared. Great. So that's what Pythagoras' theorem is. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Now I can write that in words. So we write the square on the hypotenuse. Now girls, do you know which one's the hypotenuse? Which one's the... Yeah, this is the longest side. It's the hypotenuse. So this is Pythagoras' theorem. The square on the hypotenuse is equal to the square on the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the squares. So the sum of the squares on the two shorter sides. Now girls, doesn't it make sense that the two smaller sides squared add up to the bigger side? You can't have a big number and a small number equal to a small number. The two smaller sides squared add up to the larger side squared. Okay? So if I have a triangle that looks like this, and I call it X, Y, Z, we're going to write out Pythagoras' theorem. Girls, have you written that down? I'll just pause the video. I'm going to pause the video so that you can write this down. It's in black, so the square on the hypotenuse is equal to the sum of the squares on the two shorter sides. So girls, it makes sense that the two shorter things would add up to the bigger one, but you don't write A plus B equals C, because it doesn't. It's got to be A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Girls, that's why we show you the video of the squares, so that you'll remember that it has to be squares on the sides. Now, when you talk about squares in maths, it means squared. A squared plus B squared equals C squared. Okay, now we're going to try this formula out just for some different triangles with different letters. Okay, and then we're going to do it with numbers. Pythagoras' theorem for these three triangles. Now first you need to tell me which one's the longest side. Whenever we do Pythagoras' theorem, you've got to tell me which one's the longest side. Pythagoras' theorem for these three triangles. To be able to do Pythagoras' theorem, you need to know which one's the longest side.
The hypotenuse.
Good, the hypotenuse is the longest side, and it makes sense that the two shorter ones add up to the longer one. So I'm going to label the hypotenuse. Which one's the hypotenuse? X, Y, or Z? So that's the hypotenuse. That's the longest side. So what squared plus what squared equals what squared? Tell me, girls. Do I do y plus y squared? X squared, the longer one equals which ones?
Y squared and Z squared.
Yeah. So girls, so let's write down what the hypotenuse is. I think we'll do this one first. Hypotenuse is the longest one, okay? It's opposite the right angle. So the hypotenuse squared, which is the longest one, equals the sum of the two shorter ones squared.
So much easier. You just
Okay?
realize that the hypotenuse is
It's the longest, that's right. Hypotenuse is opposite the right angle. Hypotenuse is always the longest one. So in the next example, which one's the hypotenuse? Which one's the hypotenuse?
G.
G. So hypotenuse.
Nice.
So how do I write my rule? The hypotenuse, which is the longer one, equals longest one squared equals the two shorter ones. So you find the longest one. G squared equals what?
G squared equals M squared and Y squared.
Yeah, do you see that, girls? That's the longest. So you know what I think? You know what I used to do? I used to circle the longest. I remember now.
And on the next
Circle the longest. Can you circle the longest? So that's M squared plus Y squared. Do you see it? So girls, this is what I want you to do from now on. I want you to circle the longest side.
Can we do the last one on our own?
Yes, you can. I'm going to put another 3 as well. So I'm circling the longest. Do you know what to do?
Yeah, don't do it. I want to do it.
All right, I'm going to pause and I'm going to draw 3 more that you have to do on your hypotenuse, and we're writing hype, circling it.
Hypotenuse.
So that's the bigger one, and the bigger one equals the sum of the two smaller ones, but not just normal letters. You have to do squares on each side. So how do I write this one? Girls? K squared equals
M squared
plus D squared. Now it doesn't matter if you do D squared plus M squared, as long as the longer one squared equals the two shorter ones squared. The longest thing is made up of two shorter things. Make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, girls, keep going. Fine. So A is the hypotenuse. Go, Jada.
What?
Tell me what the rule is.
Okay, so A squared
Equals
equals J squared and M squared.
plus M squared.
Yeah.
All right, who is MTI?
Me.
Go. Which one's the hypotenuse?
I.
Circle the hypotenuse. Always circle the hypotenuse. Hype, the hypotenuse. It's the longest one. Go.
I equals M.
I squared.
I squared equals M squared plus P squared.
Fantastic. Go, Laura. NLA or NAL. That's you. That's your triangle. Which one's the hypotenuse? The longest one, opposite the right angle, is the hypotenuse.
No.
Squared, the longer one squared equals the two shorter ones squared. So equals. So L squared equals N squared plus A squared.
Can I do the last one?
Okay, one sec. Hypotenuse, which is?
J.
Yep. That's the hypotenuse. It's the longest one. So J, yep. So
J squared
equals?
equals M squared plus R squared.
Fantastic. So the longer one squared equals the two shorter ones squared. Now we're going to do an example with numbers this time. Okay?
Wait, can we do one more?
No. 2 examples here with numbers. We're going to do the same thing. So which one's the hypotenuse? That's always your first step. X is the hypotenuse. Circle it and write hypotenuse. Now write the equation starting with the hypotenuse. So what do you write? X or X squared?
X squared.
How are you going to remember to do squared? What makes you remember that?
You just remember.
How do you remember? What did we show you to make you remember?
Right on your hand.
What were the videos that make you remember? The water video and the little square videos hopefully will make you remember that it's x squared equals what?
3 squared plus 4 squared.
Great. Equals 3 squared plus 4 squared. So x is my hypotenuse. It's the longer one. We circle it. We always circle the hypotenuse, the longer one, because x squared, that one, equals 3 squared plus 4 squared. Okay. Now you can get, that means that x squared, now we have to work out this side. So x squared is still the same. What's 3 squared plus 4 squared? Does anyone know what 3 squared is? That means 3 times 3.
9. 6.
9. That means 3 times 3. What's 4 squared?
4 times 4.
4 times 4 is?
ABC is easy.
What's 4 times 4?
4 times 4.
16. So x squared is, anyone know what 9 plus 16 is?
17.
Well, 16 plus 10 is 26, but I'm not adding 10 on. I'm adding 9.
24.
25. Now, girls, this is where we've got to learn something new. X squared is 25. That means something times something is 25. Now, this is where we need your calculator.
5 times 4 is 25.
5 times 5 is
Oh, yeah,
25.
5 times 5.
So, girls, but you have to learn something. See, girls, you're trying to find x, not x squared. So, we've got x squared is 25. Ladies, the opposite of squared is a special symbol or a special calculation called square root. Do you know what a square root symbol looks like?
Yeah, it's like a little, it's a flick.
The flick, yeah, that's right. Looks like this. So, girls, if x squared is 25, x is the square root of 25. So, girls, this is the tricky step. So, triangle up, x squared is x is the hypotenuse. So x squared is 3 squared plus 4 squared. Girls, if you want to do 3 squared on the calculator, just have a look. It's 3 squared. It's the 3 and then press, you probably can't see it, and then you press the x squared button. So I'll do that again for you. Cancel. 3 and press the x squared button and you press equals and you get 9.
So the answer is 9.
That's for the 3 squared. You can actually do the 3 squared plus 4
5.
squared in one go. If you want to do 4 squared on your calculator, this is what you press. You go 4 and we press this x squared button there. And on your screen it'll say 4 squared. I know this is looking really blurry. And you press the equal button and you get 16. So 3 squared is 9. 4 squared is 16. Then you can do 9 plus 16 is 25. Now, girls, x squared is 25.
25.
X is the square root of 25. Where's my square root button? There it is. Square root. Can you see? It's there. You press square root 25. Oops. Equals.
What's the time?
Square root of... So, girls, can you see? Oh, you can't. It's very blurry. There's square root of 25. It equals 5. I'll do it again. You press this button here, square root button, and then you press 25, and then you press equals, okay? So, 25 is 5. Let's just do one more before the lesson's finished. Okay, what do we do? Because you might be able to take the sheet home and try it. So what have we got? Which one's the longest side? X is the longest. It's called the hypotenuse. So set up your equation. Let's go. Come on. X squared equals... The bigger side squared is the 2 shorter ones squared. 5 squared plus 12 squared. Now, girls, if you want, you can work out 5 squared plus 12 squared all at one go on your calculator. I'm just going to do it here. Anyone know what 5 squared is? 5.
5 squared.
Wait, can we do it the way we just did the other one? Or
Yes.
like that?
Yeah, all right, go.
Can I say hi?
Take the calc. Right.
Just say hi.
Girls, come on. What's 5 squared? Girls, yes, it's 25.
Because 5 times 5.
So this is what x squared is. What's 12 squared? Anyone? Great. 12 squared is 144. Now, remembering where your squared button is, I can go 12, and I've got to get my sheet back. There's the squared button, that one is 144. Okay, now what should you do? Can you add those numbers? Yeah, so now you add 25 plus 144 on your calculator and you get 169. Girls, there is no way that the triangle is 5, 12, 169. That's not realistic. See how you've got 5 and 12? The other number should be around those numbers, not, 10 times bigger. So girls, I don't want x squared, I want x. What's the opposite of squared? Square what? Square root. So this is the square root sign. So square root of 169. Good, fantastic. So you get your calculator out and we press square root button. There, 169 equals. Look at your screen, make sure it looks right. Square root of 169 equals 13. So therefore the remaining side is 13. Okay, girls? Now you're going to finish off your worksheet. Finding the hypotenuse. Going to try and do that for homework. All right, girls, look at this question. The first one, which one's the hypotenuse? X, fantastic. Which are the other sides? Which are the two shorter sides? 7 and 11. So therefore, Pythagoras' theorem is x squared equals what? X squared equals, come on, 7 squared plus 11 squared. Now they've worked it out for us. I'll put them the other way around. Shh, girls, they've done the 11 first. 11 squared plus 7 squared. They've already worked it out. 11 squared is 121. 7 squared is 49. They've then added them together. So x is the square root of 170. Sometimes your answers aren't nice.
It's 13.0.
You get 13.0. Let's try the next one together. One more. What's the hypotenuse for the next one? Why? What are the other sides?
12 squared and
12 and 9. So how do we write it out? Y squared is 12 squared plus 9 squared. If you do 12 squared on your calculator, 12 squared on your calculator, you get 144. If you do 9 squared on your calculator, you get 81. If you add those two together, you get 225. So now y is the square root of that, 225. And if you do that on your calculator, you get 15. Okay, girls, so I'd like you to not lose the sheet and to do this for homework. Yeah.